Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we are covering one of the most frequently asked interview question in Android, that is Kotlin Coroutine Scope versus supervisor scope. But folks, before we begin and we deep dive into this topic, one quick question to all of you. So have you ever worked on a team project where one person has messed up and the whole team got blamed? So that situation is basically nothing but a coroutine scope, okay? And now imagine a team where if one person messes up and then everyone else still continues their work peacefully. So that situation is basically nothing but a supervisor scope, all right? So let's break down with real examples and try to understand what exactly the difference between the coroutine scope versus supervisor scope, okay? So guys, this is what we are going to cover in today's video. First, we will understand what is coroutine scope, then what is a supervisor scope. Then we will see some real life story examples which you will never forget, and then some Android use cases where each one shines, and followed by some code demos, and then last, the final summary, so that you will never have any confusion again between the two, okay? So let's begin with a coroutine scope. So coroutine scope is the strict one, okay? Think of it like a strict desi parent. If one child fails, everyone gets punished, okay? So inside coroutine scope, if any child or any coroutine throws an exception, the entire scope gets cancelled, okay? Let's try and understand with an example. So this is a coroutine scope, assuming we have a view model class, and inside that we are trying to make multiple API calls or multiple execution under the coroutine scope. And then the first one launches with parent 1. The second one launches after a delay of 500 milliseconds, which throws some exception. And then third one launches after 15 milliseconds, and the third one says child 3 done, okay? So basically what happens here is, as soon as as soon as child 2 fails, right, the whole family goes down. Child 3 does not even get a chance to finish its breakfast. So that is what the coroutine scope is about. If during the execution of all the launches which is happening inside a coroutine scope, if any one of them fails, then the entire scope fails. So probably this would be useful if you have a situation where you are making multiple API calls and you target that if any of the API call fails, then I want to cancel the entire scope. I don't want to continue with the other execution. Rather, I would like to cancel the entire scope. So that would be the place where you would prefer using the coroutine scope, okay? Now we will understand the supervisor scope. So supervisor scope is nothing but it is the cool parent, okay? So one child messes up, okay? Deal with that child individually, but let the other kids live their life, all right? It is not like the strict parent where one kid or one child fails and the rest of the community of kids, gets punished. That is not the case in this supervisor scope. So if you see the example, we had the similar example. The only difference is that the scope, where we have changed the coroutine scope to a supervisor scope, and we are trying to execute 3 different executions, and in this, the second one is again failing with an exception. But in this case, what will happen is the supervisor scope, the child 2, the one that is getting failed, but the child 3 says, not my problem, I'm still finishing my work. That is how it is going to behave in case of supervisor scope. So this is a place where you have, assuming 2 different API calls that is going to happen together, and you see that if any one of them fails, even then also I would want to execute the other ones and bring back the result to my UI. So what we can do is, for example, if we are making 2 API calls under supervisor scope, okay, and suppose both of them are into the try catch blocks, and if one or any one of them fails, what we can do is in the catch block, we can return the empty list or some empty data or maybe some value which you want to return in case of if the API call fails, right? And let the rest or let the other API get executed as like the same way how it was going to be executed. So that is how you're going to make use of a supervisor scope. Again, I'll repeat, you make use of a coroutine scope if you want that if any of my API call fails, then I would want to cancel the entire scope and I would want to return back to my UI saying that the API call failed, versus you use the supervisor scope where if you want that out of my 2 or 3 API calls, even if any one of them fails, then also I would want to return the result of rest of the 2 API calls plus the third one which is failed. I will return the empty list on behalf of the failed one, and then collectively I will return to my UI with the update or with the updated data. That is place where you would use the supervisor scope. All right. So basically think of both like ordering, food with friends. Coroutine scope is equals to everyone shares the bill. If one person cancels the order, the entire food order gets cancelled. Versus supervisor scope is like everyone orders separately. If one person cancels, only their food is cancelled. Everyone else eats happily. This is literally how the coroutine behave. Okay. Now, in case of this, let's try and understand the real use cases where you would see or where you actually would use in your Android. So coroutine scope use case says when task depends on each other. Example like fetch token, use token to fetch user data, use user data to fetch recommendations. So this would be the place, or these would be the use cases where you actually go ahead and use the coroutine scope. For example, like fetch token, right? If my fetch token API, like I'm trying to make 2 API calls, the first one is fetching the token. Second one is that based on that token, I'm trying to fetch the user details. And based on the third one, like based on the user details, I'm going to fetch the feeds for that particular user. So in this case, if the first one fails, then I don't see any purpose of, making the API call for the rest of the 2 things, right? How will I going to get the user details if my first API, which was returning me the token, has failed? Or how I'm going to fetch the feed for the user if the second API has failed? So this is the real-time example, or this is the real use case where actually I would recommend, or you as a developer should prefer, making use of a coroutine scope. Now let's try and understand where supervisor scope can be used. So the use case says the tasks are basically independent in this case, right? Like example, loads user profile, loads notifications, and load ads. So if ad fails, user doesn't care. They should still see the rest of the screen. That is absolutely correct. For example, on my main UI, I want to load 3 different things: the user profile, the load notifications, and I want to load the ads. All 3 are independent of each other. Even if any one of them fails, I don't give a damn, right? I still would want the rest of the other things to be loaded in a similar or in the same fashion. So that is the place where you should use the supervisor scope. For example, you make user async call, load profile, okay. The notifications async call, load notifications. The third one async, load ads, okay. If it fails, it's okay. Rest of the 2 will still return you the result, and there will be no cancellations for the entire scope. So that is the place, and that is the real use case where actually you would prefer making use of a supervisor scope. Okay. Now, the most common mistakes that the developers make, and they don't even realize that coroutine scope cancels siblings. Then they wonder why some operations don't finish. Okay. But if something fails silently 90% of the time, which actually happens, you accidentally used coroutine scope where supervisor scope was needed. Okay. So that is actually the place where you should have used the supervisor scope. For example, the coroutine scope is basically a destructive chain. If any one of them fails, any one of the child fails, it cancels all. Versus supervisor scope, which is nothing but the isolated failure. If any one of them fails, it still continues and it will give you the result. As I've mentioned you in the above slides, the real use cases where you actually should choose the correct scope, either you use coroutineScope or you use supervisorScope, you should actually be clear with your use case, which one is more apt and which one is more relevant to your use case, and accordingly you should use that particular scope. All right. So guys, the final takeaway is basically coroutineScope equals to if one fails, all fails. supervisorScope says if one fails, other will still continue. So coroutineScope is nothing but equals to strict parent. The supervisorScope is nothing but the cool parent. All right. So that's it. You will never forget again. I'm sure you will not going to forget this. The major difference between the coroutineScope versus supervisorScope. All right, folks. So that's pretty much about both of the scopes in the most realistic way possible. If you have learned something today, just drop a comment, like this video, and subscribe to the channel, because I am preparing more Kotlin, Android, and Flow episodes just like this. I'll see you in the next one.